Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia. I'm here to discuss Gone Girl with you guys today. I know that I'm a little bit slow on the reviewing train, but it honestly took me a really long time to process this movie and to work up the courage to even try to analyze it for you guys. So I'm here now. I've kind of sort of conquered my fear a little bit. But I'm gonna do my best to talk about as much that I can, but I'm not gonna be able to touch on everything, so that is where you guys come in. Feel free to share lots of comments that are constructive and fun, feedback, reactions, whatever. Anyways, the beginning of this review is going to be spoiler free. Those of you who have seen the movie, I hope will appreciate it and understand what I'm referring to, very, in as vague terms as I can. Then the rest of the review is going to be spoiler full, and if you stick around for the end, I want to compare the movie briefly to some other films and TV shows and stuff. I'm gonna try. My camera's probably gonna die before I finish it all, but let's just go ahead and get this rolling, okay? So, spoiler-free time. What I have to say, first and foremost, is that the brilliance of this film, and I love the movie. I've talked to people who loved it. I've talked to people who thought that it was complete and utter rubbish. I enjoyed it, and I'll try and explain why. So the brilliance of this film is that the truth of what led to the story's central event, the disappearance of Amy, is almost unknowable. Things get a little crazy and nebulous. The truth is constantly constructed, demolished, rewritten, and mediated by these two mythologized characters who are themselves constructions. Talking about Nick, played by Ben Affleck, and Amy, played by Rosamund Pike, both of whom did exceptional jobs, especially Rosamund. She had quite a tall order to fill, and she did so brilliantly. So Nick and Amy, they construct themselves and construct their relationship to one another, and we can only be sure of the outcome of their actions, not what led to them, or what they actually freaking were. And in the spoiler-filled part of this review, I'll explain what I mean by that. So, this is the kind of movie that is either overflowing with meaning and subtext, commentaries, mind-rending revelations about social institutions and humanity, or it's the kind that dodges all meaning, that plays out as a fantastical farce that draws on just the slightest little grains of truth, but ultimately creates and invents something that is impossible. Okay? So, really a postmodern psychological crime thriller. The film thrives on the subversion of our expectations, and I would dare say even their total disembowelment. You will pretty much have no expectations by the end of things, okay? It's a gutting film that starts with a premise, and then it opens this trap door underneath the audience, and we are just sent hurtling down through it for about 2.5 hours. And the 2.5 hours do not feel like 2.5 hours. You feel there is a huge twist halfway through that almost kind of reboots the entire film, and it just gets crazy. It's a very, very fun and riveting ride. And then, so once we figure out what actually happened to Amy and why that happened to Amy and the way that it did, we're pretty much left flailing and clawing our eyes out because we can't fathom what we actually just witnessed. Or at least that is the way that I and my friend who I saw it with felt afterwards. It was the whole what did I just watch kind of reaction, but not in a bad way, at least not for me, in a really, really good way. Really crazy. So I just have to say that if we think that it's a film with a message and a moral, a cautionary tale, a sappy Lifetime flick, or a criticism about society, we'll end up trading our every last hour of sleep for an endless barrage of nightmares. But if we think that it's a film without a message and a moral, that none of what transpires is even remotely grounded in physical, mental, or social reality, we'll also trade every last hour of our sleep for a barrage of nightmares, because there is something to this story that grips us, if only in this wild, feral kind of Freudian way. There's something to this soul eviscerating madness. Otherwise, we wouldn't walk out of the theater or walk away from the screen feeling that some part of ourselves has been stolen or violated or blown up in this crazy caricature of that something real, okay? And maybe it's just that the story exposes and realizes our fears rather than reflects our reality. And we fear that which just might become real because of the way that we live our lives, with masks and roles and facades underneath which all this insecurity and rage can fester. We know this to be true because we're human, but I don't know. And when it comes to Gone Girl, you just can't know. It's a farce, an opera, and a thriller that definitely lives up to the genre's namesake. I must also add, because this is something that everybody's talking about, that it's neither a feminist nor a misogynist manifesto. We can't trust our shifting sympathies for Amy and Nick as messages about how men and women should be portrayed in society or what they're really about. To me, that's kind of a limiting way to view the film, and it's just not accurate. There's so much that's wild and outlandish about this movie. It's better, I think, to view as a fantasy than to even break down in a non-postmodernist way. But really, for me, the person of Amy is not a picture of the traditional victimized woman or victimizing woman, the victimizer, nor is the person of Nick a picture of the victimized male or the victimizing male, the victimizer. Okay, does that make sense in just as a concept? I don't know. It's hard to not talk about the movie. Or maybe it's just that these characters are both of those things at once, victimizing and victimizers. But basically, I wouldn't fixate on feminism and misogyny in approaching the film. All you'll give yourself is more gray hairs and a bad case of indigestion. It's just not healthy for you. All you should really brace yourself for is pure insanity and enjoy the ride. Another thing that's important about Gone Girl, a way that you can view the film or parts thereof, is as a parody or satire of tabloid and sensationalized media and gossip-fueled cable. For example, the snowball effect of melodramatic media coverage plays a really critical role in the way that the story unfolds, as Nick becomes a wife killer through headlines rather than or before the presentation of legitimate evidence, and that's not to say if he does or does not do the crime. But the media coverage in the movie essentially adds an additional narrative layer to the story and complicates our ability to find the truth, although we are for the most part more frustrated than actually compelled by this media coverage, because we understand that it's all ludicrous and way out there. So while we know better, we don't know the truth. We want justice, but we don't want that kind of justice. And maybe in the end we just put our craving to justice for death because there's no justice to be had. Postmodernism for the win. So it's a crazy and exciting movie, and I highly recommend it. See it for yourself, see what you think, hash it out with your friends. It is definitely a big movie to talk about. So now I am going to dive into the spoiler zone, and again, I'll do my best to reflect on as much as I can, but there was a lot to this movie and many different ways to view and interpret it. So, spoiler time. Let's do this thing. So, after I saw the movie, like the night after, I wrote kind of my initial analysis of what I thought the film was about, and what I initially concluded, and this is kind of more of a traditional non-postmodernist analysis, is that what we're looking at in the movie is social constructs and gender stereotypes and the way that the facades that we put up as the charming guy or the cool girl ultimately destroy our capacity for intimacy because we can never know who the other person was, that kind of thing. So I'll briefly explain to you what I mean, but unfortunately, what makes this film really cool is that we have two super ridiculously unreliable narrators. We can't trust a freaking word that they say at the end of the day. That is, if we've got our street smarts, we're not, it's really difficult to take honestly what is being communicated, especially since a lot of scenes and parts of the movie follow the diary of Amy, which she wrote to incriminate her husband in her murder. And just one little detail that I love about the scenes of her writing in her journal and then the voiceovers, and we see all this, these images and scenes from Nick and Amy's very idyllic past. She writes with like this fuzzy pink princess pen. And when we think about the fact that she's not writing this journal as she goes in her life, but to freaking frame her husband for murder, this pink fairy pen, like, it's just mind-blowing. It's quite hilarious to me, and there's a lot that's really darkly humorous and at the same time macabre in this movie. And it makes it a really fun experience because your feelings are just run the gambit all over the spectrum. You're here and there, and you just hate everyone and want everything to die and explode in a fire. And that to me is a sign of a fun film. I don't know, but yeah. So basically, the way that I viewed this film initially, and I think it's still a possible way to interpret the film, is that the cool girl and charming guy constructs are, you know, into which women and men stuff their identities when seeking to conform and become accepted, are super lethal and toxic, and these seemingly innocuous beginnings to relationships ultimately lead to victimization of one partner to the other, and everything just falls apart because it's about performativity, performing, and the impossibility of maintaining intimacy when cool girl and charming guy cease to be cool and charming. So, you know, kind of what we learned from Amy, what she says in the film is that the cool girl is the gender stereotype and social construct wherein the performer becomes a male figure, like the woman becomes one of the guys, but then also becomes the pleasurer of man, and she is solely there to give the male pleasure, okay? So paradoxically, the woman has to assume the stereotypical roles of femininity, but then also cohere to the stereotypical roles of masculinity, being at once virtuous and submissive, and then playing it bad and rough. So she plays the man's game without the enfranchisement, whereas the charming guy is the gender stereotype and social construct wherein the performer pleasures the woman that he may in turn be pleasured. The charming guy, like the cool girl, strives to be more than he is as an autonomous individual. He is acting, he's playing a role, seeking to appease and impress the woman with his wit, sensitivity, and charm, but only to the extent that said act and said actions make her his, okay? So to use until the glamour and the thrill of access to her benefits fades away. But who is the man behind the charming guy and the woman behind cool girl, and who are they to one another if charming guy and cool girl fell for one another and not the individuals beneath? You know, the kind of love is blindness thing. And that is where things seem to go horribly and nightmarishly wrong for Nick and Amy. They become the people that they didn't want to be because they were already the people they weren't. They dragged one another down as these masks slipped in the face of financial insecurities, familial hardships, and the communicative breakdowns that just accumulated from there. And once Nick pulled Amy into his misery world, he no longer felt that he needed to perform as the charming guy. He just kind of relaxed and folded in on himself, and he let his love grow limp because he was not a man capable of loving a woman as charming guy so feverishly, poetically, and impossibly did, you know. And Amy clung to charming guy Nick's love by playing cool girl, hoping that she might eventually become amazing Amy, like the persona her parents so meticulously crafted in capitalizing on her failures. And so she wanted to wear this honeymoon mask for life and make an actual life from it. However, when charming guy disappeared and Amy found out that Nick's love was only a constructed and, you know, or attached to a fake self, she discovered the identity suffering beneath her fake and constructed self, and thus, in a calculated rage, decided to destroy this ugly truth with an even uglier lie that symbolized what his false performance had done to her. So, you know, performative social and gender roles obviously really can't foster trust and openness because the roles themselves are fixed. The words and behaviors exhibited vary, but their ends remain the same. Girl acts for boy, acts for girl, acts for boy, acts for girl. It's this vicious cycle of false acceptance designed for surface level gratification and resistance to the compromises that ultimately make sexual equality, emotional transparency, and genuine love. That was my initial breakdown of what the film is about. But I've ultimately concluded that you really still don't know what the film is about because a lot of the information that we gather about what inspired Amy to make herself disappear comes from a woman who is arguably a crazed sociopath. So we have to at once contend with her word being somewhat kind of valid and then her being kind of psycho nuts, okay? And I ultimately don't really know how to reconcile everything in my own mind, but I did have this interesting idea about how Amy ultimately does what she did after having grown up in the shadow of amazing Amy. Every time that Amy fell short in real life, you know, her parents would write a book about amazing Amy succeeding in those same areas where she failed. So there's this beloved literary character that's designed to mirror a beloved child, but it becomes that child's complete and utter antithesis. And, you know, so amazing Amy is the creation of Amy's parents, and she's everything Amy could never be, because amazing Amy is all about doing the things that regular Amy would not or could not do. So it's possible to say that maybe Amy spends the rest of her life trying to be her own amazing Amy by seeking empowerment within relationships and becoming a better version of herself through those connections, but then when these relationships end up leading to her diminishment or disenfranchisement, she goes alpha-ophelia, and instead of like destroying herself, she uses her significant others to self-harm and then also punish them for the ways in which they've disenfranchised her. But it's like, all of that seems kind of impossible without, you know, a few screws just inherently loose in her mind. Is how do you actually arrive at this place? And that's what makes the story this really grandiose and ridiculous fantasy opera of sorts, because how does a person actually get to this point? But I mean, a way that you could view the film is that Nick and Amy ultimately construct their love for one another, and then they construct the end to it as well. I don't know, it's really freaking confusing and crazy. But I think that that part of what's brilliant about Amy's return to Nick is that, so she sees him on the television, and I think I'm remembering this quote accurately. He calls himself a con artist and says that if Amy comes home to him, then he'll prove himself every day that, you know, if she comes and returns to his arms. So then, rather than letting the case that she's created against him run its course and land him behind bars and quite possibly on death row, she decides to take him up on this challenge that she knows he would be loath to accept, killing him slowly herself by making him fulfill his vows, living a life of pure sacrifice rather than the love that betrayed them both. So they basically just con the world senseless together. They're both con artists to each other. It reminds me a lot of that 1964 Twilight Zone episode, The Masks, in which the dying man forces his wealthy and egotistical family to don hideous face masks that epitomize the foulest parts of their personalities and, at the stroke of midnight, become a permanent part of their faces. Amy decides she'll return to her husband and clear his murderous name under one condition. They will resume their performed identities for the world and come face to face with one another for who they truly are. This is not a cool girl, charming guy affair anymore. This is the marriage of flawed individuals beneath the masks that will now carry them as a permanent reminder of the lies that became them and now destroy them in this endless cycle of woe and misery. It's just great. But so I have to say I loved the performances in this film. I think that the casting was fantastic. I think that this is a really great embodiment of David Fincher's work. I love the soundtrack too, because I barely even noticed it because I was so enmeshed and riveted by the movie that it just enhanced everything and made it that much more intense without drawing the focus away from what was happening in the film, you know? And it's just so mind-bendingly wonderful that with the unreliable narrators and unreliable narration, there's a full spectrum of ways that we can interpret things. Okay, something else that was funny to me too was the whole thing about the chin and how Amy said that Nick's chin was so villainous. Well, he's gonna be Batman in the future, so I don't know if that bodes so well for him. It's got that the Dark Knight chin going on there. Maybe we could have like this meta universe where Batman and Gone Girl collide and Nick ultimately escapes from Amy and he cons his way into the Wayne family fortune, like he's the long lost son that ran away after his parents died, and he becomes Bruce Wayne, becomes Batman. I don't know, man. I'm just trying to find a way to make myself happy after this movie wrecked and sabotaged my soul, okay? Yeah, so there was just so much that was brilliant about this film. I also wanted to talk about, there's a lot of similarities in this movie to Dexter. Of course, Nick's sister Margot is a spittin' freaking image of Deborah Morgan, the sister of Dexter Morgan. And for those of you who have seen the show Dexter, I don't even know that I need to explain to you just how similar they are, but both Margot and Deborah are these pillars of reason to their brothers, loving them through all the atrocities and lies and ridiculousness. I want to say so much more, but I need to wrap up this film soon. I think it would have been fun if Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad was the save-the-day attorney for Nick. That would have been good, but Tyler Perry was an interesting and ultimately pretty good choice. And yeah, and also I have to say that when I came into this movie, I thought it was going to be really similar to the premise of Fargo, where the bumbling and calamitously selfish husband unwittingly catalyzes his wife's demise, and then the straight-laced and laser-focused lady cop is on the case until the final violent expose, and in many ways it was actually kind of similar to that. So, you know, I was drawing some Fargo comparisons in my mind. I was also even thinking about True Detective as well, with kind of the infidelity and how all of that plays out. But still, because of how unreliable the narrators are, what's so wild about everything that happens with Amy making herself disappear and then ultimately killing to get back to her husband to have this really unfulfilling, ridiculously sociopathic relationship, like it all just What actually started it? How can we know? We can't freaking trust anyone, no matter who we want to try and sympathize with. And I think it's in our nature, and as viewers, we want to feel like we can sympathize, but we, to some extent, have to accept these lies. You know, I don't even know. That's what's the most mind-blowing thing for me, and maybe that's something that you guys found as well in thinking about the film. So there's a really kind of traditional postmodernist or non-postmodernist way to view the film, and then the super postmodernist way that's like, how do we even know what the crap is actually happening, and why is it that a film wherein we don't know what the crap is actually happening, how can it make us feel so much? I don't know. So that's kind of my review and analysis. Please fill in the blanks of anything I missed. Ask me your questions. I do discourage people commenting and just saying that, like, oh, this movie was so dumb, and, you know, really make a comment that invites productive discussion, because I want to talk with you guys, but I don't want to reply to dumb comments. So I love y'all. I love y'all. Thanks so much for watching. I will be back with the Walking Dead reviews, Gotham reviews, fun stuff. Subscribe if you enjoy my madness, and if you enjoy me talking about madness in my crazy way. It'll be a good time. So, you guys, take care, heal your brains, relax a spell, watch Guardians of the Galaxy. You'll feel worlds better after Gone Girl, and I will see you before you know it.